Adam, you want to get this thing started?
Yeah. So welcome everybody. My name is Adam Carr. I've been involved along with Rob and a robust team of really smart, capable people. Throughout the month of May, we did a focus on the open housing marches. Those happened a little over 50 years ago. And that's something that we do kind of all the time. We thought the moment of the pandemic was a good time to unpack some of that history and bring some other voices into the conversation. And then in just this moment, we're actually planning to pivot into the month of June, focusing on Latinx history in Milwaukee and Wisconsin. But we're going to take this week off. We saw everything that was happening. George Floyd was killed last Monday. This is all happening very quickly. It feels like so much has happened since then. It's been such a blur. But the very good historians and voices that we have gathered here today are going to give us some background. I've been thinking of them as Cliff's Notes to understand how we got to this moment. Obviously, it's remarkably dramatic. It's very hard to say where it's even going to go at this moment in time. But we wanted to spend some time looking at the roots of this moment and how we got to June 3rd of 2020. The focus on the open housing marches, that's one of the taproots of youth resistance in Milwaukee. I mean, we've had a long tradition of youth resistance in Milwaukee that's being carried forward today in this very moment. So with that, Rob likes to use the analogy of pickup basketball. We have a bunch of great people at the table. Some of them, we have some plays that have been created, but a lot of this is just going to be hustle. So let's get into it.
Yeah, we called some of our buddies and friends and said, let's see if we can get into a conversation to help folks think through this moment. Not all of us have the capacity to, for any number of reasons, to be a part of street demonstrations. We know how important the demonstrations are and how much conflict comes with that. But we also know that in this moment, it's all hands on deck. And so for us educators, we want to make sure we're doing our part in making sure that we teach this moment accurately before the revisions start to happen. We want to capture this moment as best as we can so that we understand it here and now, and then also deliver that information to our young people as effectively as possible. Let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have a number of very important voices here, and we're going to talk about those. And Keisha, you can go to our next slide. Thank you. We got Fred Royal, president of the local NAACP chapter here in Milwaukee, and he leads our Community Coalition for Quality Policing. Jared English for Future Wisconsin. Jared has done quite a bit of work around our fire and police commissions. Grant Silva, professor of philosophy out of Marquette University. Will Checker-Wright is a doctoral student from UW-Milwaukee, and Ben Lindsay, a doctoral student at Marquette University. I want to say a little bit about doctoral students. We've invited them specifically because doctoral students are at the forefront of the scholarship. They are the ones who are pushing the scholarship forward. And so in many respects, when it comes to literature and all that, our graduate students are in many respects pushing the fields and the disciplines forward. And so they are on top of where the scholarship is headed, more so in many respects than most of the folks who've been faculty for a while. So we're going to cover a couple of topics. We're going to talk a little bit about police and policing. We're going to talk about Trump and white nationalism. We'll revisit Barack Obama, and then we'll talk a little bit about the war on crime. And what we want to do and what we want to remind folks is that this is an activity where we are building context. We want to make sure that we have the key components to the context of the moment, and that allows us to get into some historical antecedents and move us into how we got here today. We'll probably need to do some more of these as things unfold and things develop. There are any number of topics that we could cover that also are a part of this moment and help to inform the context of today. But these are the topics we'll cover today, and our panelists will help us think through and consider those conversations. Please join us in the chat. Don't wait. Do not wait at all. Send thoughts, send questions, send comments, and then we also have some resources for our educators out here. So we will continue these conversations as needed. All righty. let's keep going to the next slide. We know the heavy, heavy emotional components to this moment. And before we move forward, as is often the case in many of the public conversations and demonstrations, we want to honor the folks who've been the victims and the unfortunate folks who for unfortunate experiences with police violence in all the various ways. We want to get you all involved right away. So what we ask you to do is jump into your chat and type the names of the folks who we know who've experienced the horrific state violence at the hands of police. This is our way to get you all into the conversation as soon as possible. So say their names by typing their names in the chat. Yeah, thank you very much, folks. We'll take a minute or so to do that. And put names in more than once. Thank you very much, folks. And if you shed a tear or two in the process, that's all right. We honor them. Both those folks who we know here locally in our region who have experienced the destructive nature of police violence and those from across the country, we honor them. We say their names. As we begin our conversation, it's very important for us to remember one of the key components to how we got here is this longstanding practice of police serving in many respects as occupying agents in urban communities. In fact, it's very difficult, it's almost impossible to go through the history of the urban experience, particularly in the last several decades where we've seen urban rebellions, and there not be some connection to police violence. In fact, it is often the case that police violence is one of the key components to what drives urban communities to rebel. Obviously, very directly connected to that are the socioeconomic disparities that lead to significant percentages of unemployment, limited employment opportunities more broadly, housing, the way that not only housing segregation has played a role in shaping our racial geographies, but the ways in which housing, particularly in urban communities, continue to be dilapidated because of the inability or ineffectiveness of landlords and the like. But we know we got here today largely because of the longstanding practice of police murder. And to get our panelists into the conversation, I want to welcome Fred Royal and Jared English into this conversation now. Fred and Jared, we'll ask Fred to start. The one key question that we ask that folks are most frustrated about is the lack of convictions. How is it that we have video evidence, we have long-standing histories associated with this? What is it that makes it so challenging for there to be convictions with regard to law enforcement who've taken the lives of innocent, unarmed people?
Peace and love, family. So, if this is the basketball analogy, I would be basket hanging. Uh, but let's talk about the original sin of this country, and that's slavery. And then let's look at our constitutions, both the state and the national, which say is that slavery is prohibited. There shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in this state or nation, otherwise than for the punishment of crime, wherefore the party has been duly convicted. And let's understand that police law enforcement was created from the bastration of fugitive slave uh, enforcers, folks that were charged with rounding up and gathering and bringing back runaway slaves. And then let's further look into the historical perspective of how post slavery, uh, Black men in particular were lynched for doing various so called crimes against the citizenry. And we combine that with this whole notion that law enforcement currently has this cover in which they say, "I feared for my life." Law enforcement, European Americans have never feared African Americans in this country. If you look at the dynamics of who has been summarily killed at the hands of citizens in this country, Black men, with the exception of Nat Turner, have rarely uh, organized a systematic killing of human life. So that's part of this whole notion and systematic way in which law enforcement has used this historical cloak to say, "I feared for my life," to get off of persecution of summarily killing a human being.
Thanks, Fred. We appreciate it. You know, there's also been a long-standing practice of working to get community voices into the process by which these questions around law enforcement and the inappropriate behaviors of law enforcement get reviewed by community members, and community members have a say in that process for any number of reasons. Jared, can you talk to us a little bit about fire and police commissions, maybe the one here in Milwaukee? Can you tell us a little bit about what they're supposed to do and the shortcomings as well? And then I'm going to invite Will Checkeritis into the conversation because he's doing some work on police accountability as well. But Jared, can you follow up where Fred left off there and talk to us a little bit about fire and police commissions and the challenges with community review? You might be muted, Jared. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
You can, yes, sir.
All right. Um, so when it comes to the Fire and Police Commission, specifically the one here in the city of Milwaukee, by ordinance, by state law, by every measure, they are one of, if not the most powerful police and fire oversight agency in the entire nation. In practice, they have completely failed, not necessarily individually as the commissioners and staff there necessarily, but as an organization to keep police in check. There's many reasons for that. There's a lot of kind of political favor trading that goes on with people being appointed and folks, for instance, who the mayor, for whatever reason, promotes there, and they need something from him, he needs something from them, and so they get appointed. There is, I'm just going to be very real because I've been, you know, I think this is something that's necessary at this moment in time.
That's why we invited you. Come on, give it to us.
Oh, yeah. You know, when it comes to elected officials, and I include all the people who I consider friends of human beings and all this and that, but as a city, and then as a broader community, for those who are in power in this city and this state, we have absolutely critically failed the people. As an organization, the Common Council has been inept in its duty as a fiduciary um, um, agent of the city and controlling the money, which we all know is where the power is. Um, they have not exercised that power. They have enabled um, the complicity of the Fire and Police Commission because instead of allowing it to be a true civilian oversight board with no conflicts of interest with the agencies it's overseeing, they have and out of one side of their mouth, the Common Council we're talking here, appointed via the the pushing of the mayor, a former police officer. Um, and then on the other hand, they will say that that person is helping to impede the operations of the Fire and Police Commission. So it's either one or the other. They're going to either allow it to be a truly civilian organization and stand up to the mayor as a co-equal branch of city government to disallow that. Or they're going to be complicit and allow the police to gain even more power than they already have. For those who don't know, the city of Milwaukee, at last check, spends 47% of its budget on policing. We talk about the military industrial complex, where there's very much a real thing, such a thing as police industrial nonprofit complex here in Milwaukee, where, as I said before, the agencies and entities with the money control things. And so through the regrant process, the police, through the huge amount of money that they're given by the city government, can influence and control different community situations. And so, go ahead.
I'm just going to jump in. This is Will Chakaritis here. Jared, you're offering a wonderful analysis here of the MFPC. Just one thing I want to add is this board was never established to be an accountability board in truth, right? Mm-hmm. This is something I talk about a little bit in my work, but in around 1883, 84, it was really professional middle-class citizens working with the business community to come in and establish a police board that was going to limit the power of working-class political parties, right? So their whole goal coming in was really just to prevent changeover on the police department, because with every municipal election, you would have the Democrats coming in, Republicans going out, and then eventually people's parties and workers' parties, and we would have a whole new police department rolling in. So it was really an attempt to limit that municipal changeover. And over time, it's really Black residents who are demanding that it become more of an oversight board and actually live up to some of those precedents in its legal founding.
Absolutely. And thank you for that historical perspective, Will. And the rest of y'all didn't see it, but Will, he had a kind of a shaggy haircut. I like the new cut, man. I appreciate that.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, jump in.
Point as well.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what's fascinating about this discussion is, so we think of law enforcement as, the tropes of protecting and serving. But really, law enforcement protects and serves the status quo, the predominant prevailing social order. That just so happens to be one of, to put it on the table, white supremacy, where the interest of a select few in the state of Wisconsin and the city of Milwaukee, it's their interests that are being watched out for, that are being safeguarded. And so when we think about the role of law enforcement and the need for some kind of some accountability mechanism, we have to see that as a big problem, right? We have to see that kind of stasis, the way in which we want to preserve the prevailing social order, which alienates Black population, alienates the Latinx population in a variety of ways. We have to see that as part of the problem as well.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
We are getting instructions from Command Central that we need to move forward. Folks who are joining us, because we want to make sure that we are supporting the educators and how to teach this, we are trying to keep our sections in discrete 15-minute or so groupings so that we are able to then turn this into some very useful online modules for our young people in the classroom. So
before we go, I have one thing
yeah,
I
go
would
ahead,
like to
Ben.
add. In addition to the problem of making these police accountable, when there is accountability and they are fired or forced to resign, there's a wandering police phenomenon in which they are then hired by another municipality. And often the municipality that then hires them sees a number of complaints against these new officers that are 2 times the rate that they had at their former place of employment. The example that immediately comes to mind is Tim Lohman, the Cleveland police officer who shot and killed Tamir Rice. That was his second position. He had been allowed to resign from Independence, Ohio Police Department for a, quote, dangerous loss of composure during a firearms training.
Mm. Mm. And so what we're seeing then is not only the challenges with law enforcement and their behaviors, but then also almost a rewarding of that behavior if indeed you can continue to get employed and continue those practices. That's a very important component. Thank you, Ben.